Hello and welcome to Starbound's second channel. My name is Gabriel the Bibi Capaldi and I'll be your narrator today. But before we get into today's story, please do check down below that you are subscribed to the channel. It's 100% free and helps us pop up on your feed a bit more often. The headlines were everywhere across the galaxy. Level 1 versus Level 100 Deathworlder. This new TV show of galactic proportions had, of course, infected the galaxy when humanity finally reached the galactic stage, bringing with it cultural trends that hit the other species with enormous intensity. The crew of Research Outpost E7, perched on the frozen wastes of an unnamed ice world at the edge of charted space, had succumbed to the infection like everyone else. The outpost's purpose, monitoring deep space anomalies and cataloguing the distant warp signatures, had taken a distinct back seat to more pressing matters. Specifically, the upcoming episode of the galaxy's most watched reality show. The three researchers, each from different non-Deathworld species, stood clustered before the outpost's entertainment screen, their various appendages moving in anticipation. 10 minutes until showtime, and they were already deep in heated debate about the odds of each species. Hydily shifted his weight from one slender leg to the other, his golden skin shining in yellow in the artificial light of the common room. To humans, his species, the Evir, looked remarkably like the elves from their ancient folklore. Tall and graceful, with slightly elongated limbs and pointed ears that swept back from angular faces. The main differences were the golden yellow skin tone and the unusual eyes, larger than a human's, with amber irises that seemed to catch and hold light. His long fingers, which had only 4 digits each, moved expressively as he spoke. "I'm telling you both, the humans won't take this one," he said. "A swamp world? That's completely different from the jungle they dominated last time. No solid ground, constant moisture, unpredictable weather. It's going to neutralize their endurance advantage." Lodaro inflated his throat sac slightly, a sign of disagreement among the Zior. Where humans saw his people and immediately thought frog, the comparison was mostly superficial. The Zior were humanoid in build, but with skin that had a natural moisture barrier, giving it a glossy appearance. Their eyes were larger than a human's and positioned slightly wider on their faces, providing better peripheral vision. "Actually," Lodaro said, his voice carrying a slight reverberation, "I'm not certain about the humans either. But this environment, my people would thrive there. We could give these Deathworlders real competition in a swamp. The humidity, the water everywhere, it's practically a Zior paradise." From his perch on the arm of their battered couch, Imid let out a sharp whistle of laughter. His appearance was the most striking of the three, essentially a humanoid covered in sleek black feathers, with a curved orange beak instead of lips and a nose. His species, the Kithara, had evolved on a low-gravity world and retained many avian features while developing a humanoid body plan. His arms were normal enough, though his hands had only 3 fingers, plus a thumb, each tipped with a small talon.
"Oh, Lodaro,"
he chirped, his head tilting at a sharp angle.
"The Deathworlders would catch you within a day and serve you up with a side of swamp greens. Your precious swamp world won't save you when a human decides you look like dinner."
His tail feathers, which extended from the base of his spine like a peacock's train, fanned slightly for emphasis.
"Best case scenario, the gravity pins you to the ground, and you spend the whole time flopping around in the shallows, where you can actually breathe."
Hydily found himself grinning, an expression he'd picked up from watching too much human media, as his companions launched into their familiar pre-show argument. Lodaro's throat sac inflated to its full size, turning a deeper shade of purple as he protested.
"That's completely unfair. We Zior have adapted to dozens of different gravity wells across the galaxy. A swamp world's gravity wouldn't be any worse than your home world's 0.7 standard.
Imid interrupted, preening one wing with smug satisfaction.
Please, these Deathworlders come from worlds with gravities that would crush your bones into paste. Well, if you had bones instead of that cartilage nonsense, at least we can eat more than one specific type of food.
Lodaro shot back, his eyes rotating to focus all four pupils on the avian.
When was the last time your people survived anywhere without your precious Genava larvae? Oh, that's right. Never. You'd starve within 3 days on any world that didn't import your specialty diet.
Heideley decided it was time to redirect the conversation before they missed the opening.
So, who do we think takes it this time?
He asked, settling into his usual spot on the couch, a specifically modified seat that accommodated his species' unusual joint configuration. I know I said the humans won't win, but I'm curious about your picks. Lodaro's throat sac deflated slightly as he considered.
The humans are remarkably adaptable, I'll give them that. They can eat practically anything organic. Their endurance is legendary, and they seem to thrive on adversity. But a swamp world?
He shook his bulbous head.
That's asking a lot, even for them. The constant moisture, the diseases, the predators that thrive in such environments. It's really not their optimal habitat. Are you seriously doubting the humans?
Imid squawked, nearly dropping his snack container.
Did you miss the desert episode? The whole galaxy said they'd fail. Too hot, no water, hostile fauna. And what happened? They won by a margin of 15 days. 15! The next closest species gave up while the humans were still building sandcastle fortifications for entertainment.
That's exactly my point, though, Heideley interjected, his pupils in each eye converging on his companions.
The humans have an unfair advantage in this game. They invented it. No other species would think to gather Deathworlders from across the galaxy and make them compete in survival challenges as entertainment.
It takes a special kind of intensity to look at the most dangerous species in known space and think, oh, let's make them fight nature for our amusement.
Special kind of genius, you mean?
Lodaro corrected, settling onto his own reinforced seat, one that could handle the constant moisture his skin produced.
Whatever else we say about humans, this show is the most watched program in galactic history. My spawning cluster back home schedules their entire week around new episodes.
Mine too, Imid added, his arms gesturing excitedly.
My flock mother messages me constantly about her betting pools. She made enough credits to upgrade her nest 3 times over.
The 3 researchers shared a moment of laughter, Heideley's melodious tones mixing with Lodaro's deep croaks and Imid's chirping whistles. It was a sound that would have been impossible before the galactic community formed, but now it was as natural as the show they were about to watch. The entertainment system chimed, and the screen flickered to life as it automatically connected to the broadcast. The familiar fanfare of the show began to play, a mixture of sounds from various death worlds that somehow combined into a rhythm that made every species' auditory organs perk up with attention.
I still think that if we consider the environmental factors,
Lodaro began, but both his companions cut him off with urgent gestures for silence. The screen filled with the spectacular visuals the show was known for, sweeping shots of a mist-shrouded world, where water and land blurred together in an endless expanse of green and brown. Then, bursting through the atmospheric fog like a small sun, came the show's host, or rather, the AI avatar of the host. Jimmy version 31.2 materialized in all his holographic glory, his appearance calibrated to be appealing, non-threatening to the maximum number of species. Today, He'd chosen a form that was vaguely humanoid, but with features borrowed from various galactic species. Evir eyes, Zior skin texture, Kithara feather accents, and dozens of other small touches.
Greetings, sentients of the galaxy!
Jimmy's voice boomed, somehow managing to sound enthusiastic in every known language simultaneously.
Welcome to episode 3 of Level 1 versus Level 100 Deathworlders, the show where we take the galaxy's most dangerous species and ask the immortal question, who's really the apex survivor?
The camera swooped through the swamp world's atmosphere, giving viewers a tour of the terrain. Hydely noticed his companions leaning forward, drinking in every detail.
For this episode,
Jimmy continued, his avatar now standing on a piece of semi-solid ground, surrounded by murky water.
We've acquired, yes, acquired, an entire planet! This pristine swamp world, previously uninhabited and unclaimed, will serve as our arena. And here's the beautiful part, folks. At the end of this episode, we'll be donating this entire world to the Melody refugees who lost their homeworld to the Scourge invasion. But for now,
his grin widened, impossibly.
For now, this bug ball belongs to our contestants.
The show's graphics exploded across the screen, showing the rules in pictographic form for species who processed information differently.
100 individuals from each participating Deathworld species. Survival gear approved by our Fair Play Committee. Stay as long as you can, or tap out whenever you want. Last species standing wins the grand prize, and more importantly, the ultimate bragging rights. Who will emerge victorious? Who will return home with wet appendages and wounded egos? Let's find out!
Here we go, Hydely murmured, settling deeper into his seat as the first contestants began to appear on screen. The llama deer were introduced first, and Hydely couldn't help but wince. The screen showed a dozen of the creatures being deployed from their transport, their segmented bodies glistening with the acidic secretions that made them famous, or infamous, depending on perspective. Each llama-deer looked like someone had crossed a centipede with a chemical factory, their dozens of legs carrying bodies that constantly oozed corrosive substances.
First elimination, calling it now,
Imid chirped confidently.
What good is acid secretion in the swamp? They'll dissolve their own shelters. The water will dilute their acid anyway,
Lodaro agreed, his eyes tracking the llama deer as they immediately began having difficulties with the soggy ground.
Their main survival trait is completely neutralized here.
Hydely nodded, already mentally counting the llama deer out, but the show had moved on to the next species, and all three researchers straightened with interest.
Now here's a contender!
Jimmy's voice rang out as the transport doors opened to reveal the Aquir. The bipedal species emerged with confident movements, their scales shifting from blue to green as they adapted to the environment's light. Each Aquir stood roughly 2 meters tall, with powerful legs ending in webbed feet, and arms that terminated in hands bearing both webbed fingers and retractable claws.
Look at them move,
Lodaro exclaimed, his throat sac pulsing with excitement.
They're not even hesitating at the water's edge.
The broadcast showed the Aquir diving gracefully into the deeper channels of the swamp, their gills flaring open as they switched from air to water breathing without missing a beat. When they emerged, they used their claws to scale the twisted trees with ease, setting up elevated positions to survey their territory. Definite favorites for this environment, Hydely agreed, his multiple pupils tracking different Aquir simultaneously. Aquatic adaptation, climbing ability, and those scales probably protect against most swamp parasites.
Plus, they are traveling light,
Imid observed, pointing a wing at the screen.
See? Minimal equipment. They're planning to live off the environment rather than hauling supplies around.
The excitement in the room reached a new peak as Jimmy announced the next species.
And now, ladies, gentlemen, and self-replicating entities of all configurations, the species you've all been waiting for, the controversial champions of our first 2 episodes, humanity!
The transport carrying the human contestants appeared on screen, but instead of the typical deployment procedure, the rear hatch burst open and figures began launching themselves out into the sky.
What are they doing?
Lodaro croaked in alarm.
They are insane!
Imid squawked at the same moment, but Heideley found himself leaning forward, fascinated, as the humans deployed parachutes. Actual fabric parachutes, like something from a historical documentary. They descended through the swamp world's thick atmosphere in a controlled fall, whooping and hollering in what appeared to be enthusiasm rather than terror.
Show-offs,
Lodaro muttered, but there was admiration in his tone. The humans landed in various spots across their designated area, immediately shrugging off the parachutes and revealing the massive packs on their backs. Where the Aquir had brought minimal supplies, the humans seemed to have brought half a hardware store.
That's got to be 50 kilos of equipment each,
Imid calculated, his head tilting as he studied the screen.
In this gravity and humidity, they'll exhaust themselves just carrying it around.
Or, Heideley countered, they'll use it to build advantages the other species can't match. Remember the desert episode? They brought similar loads and turned them into water collectors and shade structures.
Fair point, Lodaro conceded. But this environment is completely different. You can't just engineer your way out of constant moisture and... Oh, what's this?
The broadcast had moved on to showcasing the other competing species, and the 3 researchers settled in for the full rundown. The Vectari arrived in armored shells that seemed perfect for defense, but terrible for navigating muddy terrain. The Gorvans, silicone-based life forms, immediately began having issues with the high moisture content in the air. The Terex, insectoid Deathworlders with wings, looked promising until the commentator mentioned that their flight capability was severely limited in the humid atmosphere.
The Risen might do well,
Imid suggested as the broadcast showed the serpentine species slithering through the swamps with ease.
Natural swimmers, and that infrared vision will help in the mist. Until they need to thermoregulate, Lodaro countered. Cold-blooded in a swamp means they'll be sluggish every morning and evening.
As species after species was introduced, Heideley noticed a pattern in their discussion. No matter which Deathworlder appeared on screen, the conversation always circled back to comparing them with either the humans or the Aquir.
The Morvac have those impressive tusks, but they're not built for swimming like the Aquir. Sure, the Gentari can secrete paralytic venom, but can they make tools like the humans? The Skarn's electromagnetic sense is useful, but it won't help them build shelters the way we've seen humans do.
By the time Jimmy had introduced all the competing species, it was clear that the 3 researchers had unconsciously narrowed the real competition down to 2 frontrunners, with everyone else competing for 3rd place.
All right, sentience!
Jimmy's voice boomed as the screen split to show multiple feeds from across the swamp world.
Day 1 begins now! Let's see who's got what it takes to survive the bog of doom.
The first day proved eventful beyond anyone's expectations. The swamp world, seemingly peaceful during the introduction, revealed its true nature as the local sun began to set. Storm clouds gathered with unnatural speed, and within hours, the entire region was being lashed by torrential rain and howling winds.
Oh, this is brutal,
Heideley said, watching as various species scrambled for shelter. The Aquir seemed unbothered, simply diving deeper into the water channels to wait out the storm. But on the other feed, the humans were struggling with their high-tech tents, which kept collapsing in the wind and sinking into the muddy ground.
So much for human engineering,
Imid chirped smugly.
Look at them flailing around with those poles and fabric. Should have gone minimal like the Aquir.
Wait, look at the Vectari. Lodaro pointed to another feed. The armored species had simply retracted into their shells, but the rain was pooling around them, and several were already showing signs of distress.
I don't think they can breathe properly when water covers their ventilation ports.
Sure enough, within hours, the Vectari were the first to tap out, their emergency beacons flashing as transport ships arrived to extract them.
First elimination to the Vectari, not the Lamadier,
Imid said, sounding disappointing.
There goes my bet.
You bet on the order of elimination? Hydely asked, amused.
Just with myself. Makes it more interesting.
As the night progressed, 3 more species called for extraction. The Gorvans couldn't handle the moisture. The Terek's wings became too waterlogged to function, and surprisingly, the Morvac, despite their impressive size, found themselves sinking into the bog with every step.
The Lamadier are still in it,
Lodaro observed, genuine surprise in his voice.
How are they managing?
The feed showed the answer. The Lamadier had used their acidic secretions strategically, creating raised platforms by dissolving vegetation into a compressed mass that hardened above the waterline. They huddled together on these platforms, their equipment keeping them relatively dry.
Clever,
Hydely admitted.
They turned their weakness into a strength. Unlike the humans,
Imid added, pointing to the feed where the human contestants were still battling with their shelters.
They look miserable.
It was true. The humans were soaked through, their equipment scattered, and several were working by lamplight to try and create some kind of functional shelter, compared to the Aquir, who were practically frolicking in their natural element. The humans looked like they might not make it past the first week. I take back what I said about human advantages, Hydely said. This might be their elimination episode. The broadcast jumped to a time-lapse of the next 4 days, with Jimmy providing colourful commentary. Day 2 dawned clearer, but the damage was done for some species. The Votar, who had survived the first night by climbing into the trees, made a fatal error when they began foraging for food.
Oh no!
Lodaro groaned as the feed showed several Votar writhing in pain.
They ate the purple fruit, didn't they?
Toxic to their physiology, Hydely confirmed as the Votar emergency beacons began flashing. Basic survival rule, never eat purple on an unknown world.
Unless you're human,
Imid added.
They seem to digest everything.
By day 3, the humans had finally sorted their shelter situation. The feed showed them abandoning their high-tech tents entirely, instead using ropes and their parachute fabric to create elevated hammock-like structures suspended between the sturdier trees.
Now that's adaptation,
Hydely said appreciatively.
They recognized their ground-based approach wasn't working and completely changed strategies. Only took them 3 days of misery,
Imid countered, but he was watching the human feed with obvious interest. Day 4 brought another wave of eliminations. The constant moisture was taking its toll on species not adapted for it. The Skarn's electromagnetic organs were malfunctioning. The Risen were struggling with a fungal infection that attacked their scales, and 5 other species simply couldn't handle the perpetual dampness anymore.
7 species out, just from being wet,
Lodaro said, shaking his head.
My people would consider this a vacation.
Your people also don't compete in Deathworld challenges, Imid pointed out, preening a few feathers that had gotten ruffled.
There's vet, and then there's Deathworld swamp wet, a different category entirely.
The Lamadier are still holding on, Heideley pointed out. The acid-secreting species had expanded their raised platforms and were methodically working through their supplies. They'd even developed a rotation system, where half the group rested while the others maintained their acid platforms. Day 5 now, and they're... Wait, what's happening? The Lammerdeer were gathering at their beacon point, and their leader was activating the extraction signal.
"They're not injured or sick,"
Imid observed, confused.
"Why are they tapping out?"
Jimmy's avatar appeared to explain. "After 5 days of successful survival, the Lammerdeer have made a strategic decision to withdraw. Their leader cites exhaustion and dwindling supplies are the primary factors. Let's give them a round of applause, folks. 5 days in the swamp is nothing to sneeze at. Well, assuming your species can sneeze."
"Exhaustion?"
Lodaro repeated.
"They just got tired and quit?"
"Smarter than destroying themselves for entertainment," Heideley said, though he privately thought it was a bit anticlimactic. "Still, they lasted way longer than we predicted." The broadcast entered another time-lapse, covering day 6 through 20 in a blur of activity. This was when the real survival challenge began. Initial supplies exhausted, every species was forced to forage, hunt, and truly live off the land, or water in this case.
"Now we'll see who the real survivors are,"
Imid said, leaning forward until he nearly fell off the couch arm. The attrition was steady but dramatic. Species that had seemed strong in the first week began to falter when faced with finding food in an alien ecosystem. Some poisoned themselves despite precautions. Others simply couldn't catch the swift aquatic prey or identify edible plants. The humidity and persistent skin conditions claimed others. By day 20, Jimmy's excited voice announced what the 3 researchers had been anticipating.
"Incredible resilience from all our contestants! But we're down to our final 3 species. The Aqueers, still going strong in their aquatic paradise. The humans, who've transformed their initial struggles into swamp mastery. And in a shocking twist that no one saw coming, the Sea Durinans."
"The Sea Durinans?"
All 3 researchers exclaimed in unison. The feed showed why. The tiny species, none taller than a human's knee, had found natural hollows in the massive swamp trees. They'd turned these into fortified homes, complete with ventilation systems and rainwater collection. Their small size meant they needed less food, and they'd become experts at catching the insects that swarmed the swamp.
"Brilliant!"
Lodaro exclaimed.
"They turned being tiny into the ultimate advantage. I'm betting on them,"
Imid announced suddenly.
"Right now, 100 credits says the Sidarinans take the whole thing."
"You're on," Heideley found himself saying. "I'll put 100 on the humans."
"Then I guess I'm taking the Aqueer,"
Lodaro said, his throat sac pulsing with excitement.
"Let's make this interesting. Winner takes all. Plus, let's say a week of the others' ration packs."
"Deal," Heideley and Imid said simultaneously. The broadcast showed all 3 species in their element. The Aqueer were practically thriving, swimming through flooded regions with ease, catching fish and amphibians with their claws, and sleeping comfortably in partially submerged shelters. The Sea Durinans had become invisible unless you knew where to look, their tree hollows blending perfectly with the environment, and the humans.
"Are those spears?"
Imid asked incredulously. The humans had indeed crafted spears, along with what appeared to be fish traps, water purification systems using sand and charcoal, and even a rough smokehouse for preserving meat. Their elevated camps had evolved into elaborate treehouse-like structures, connected by rope bridges.
"Show-offs,"
Lodaro muttered, but Heideley could hear the admiration in his voice. The competition entered a new phase when Jimmy announced a twist on day 21. Our final three have gotten too comfortable. Time to spice things up with our Predator drones! The screen showed sleek, palm-sized drones emerging from hidden deployment points across the swamp. Each one was equipped with paintball guns and sophisticated tracking systems. Jimmy explained the rules with evident glee. Each hit counts as a wound. 3 wounds and you're considered too injured to continue effectively. But here's the twist. The drones learn from each encounter. So they'll get better at hunting you.
Here we go.
Imid sighed.
Every time the contestants figure things out, they add a new challenge.
Keeps it interesting, Heideley argued, watching as the drones began their patrol patterns. Non-lethal, but getting hit means you're wounded and have to treat it like a real injury. And that learning algorithm is nasty. The drones will remember successful tactics. The introduction of the drones changed everything. The Aquir's strategy of staying in the water became a liability when drones could hover over the surface and target them when they came up for air or to hunt in the shallows. Several Aquir were wounded in the first day alone.
Come on,
Lodaro groaned as another Aquir took a paint pellet to the shoulder.
Dive deeper.
They have to surface eventually, Imid pointed out.
And look, the Sidarinans are doing exactly what I expected. You can't hit what you can't see.
The tiny species had indeed become almost impossible to target. They moved only when necessary, used the tree bark as camouflage, and their small size made them difficult targets even when spotted. The humans took a different approach entirely. They organized into teams, with some members acting as spotters, while others moved for resources. They developed a communication system, using whistles and hand signals, allowing them to warn each other of approaching drones. Military tactics, Heideley observed. They're treating it like a combat exercise.
It's working,
Lodaro admitted grudgingly as the humans successfully evaded multiple drones while still managing to gather food and water. Days passed in a blur of drone chases, near misses, and steadily increasing tension. The Aquir, despite their initial advantage, were struggling. Their need to surface regularly made them predictable targets, and several had been wounded enough times that they were effectively incapacitated. On day 32, the last Aquir raised their beacon.
No!
Lodaro's throat sac deflated completely.
They were so close. They relied too much on their aquatic advantage. If they were just a little bit smarter, they might have won.
Might have isn't did, Heideley said, trying not to sound too smug. It's down to humans versus Sidarinans now. The competition between the final two species was fascinating to watch. The Sidarinans continued their strategy of minimal movement and maximum concealment. Days would pass without a drone spotting even one of them. Meanwhile, the humans maintained their active approach, constantly improving their camp, gathering resources, and evading drones through teamwork and communication.
Both strategies are working,
Imid said, sounding nervous about his bet.
How long can they keep this up?
The answer came on day 35, when the weather turned again. But this time, it wasn't rain that fell from the sky. It was snow.
Winter storm?
Lodaro said, confused.
Jimmy didn't mention the swamp world had winter.
Probably didn't know, Heideley said, watching as temperatures plummeted and the swamp began to freeze over. Orbital mechanics can be unpredictable on unmapped worlds. The cold changed everything. The Sidarinans, with their small body mass, couldn't maintain their body temperature effectively. The feed showed them huddling together in their tree hollows, trying desperately to conserve heat. The humans, meanwhile, had challenges of their own, but their size worked in their favor, and they had one crucial advantage. They'd kept their parachute fabric and used it to create insulated shelters. They also had fire, which they'd been using for cooking and could now use for warmth.
The Sadaranans can't leave their shelters, Imid said, his voice falling. They can't forage in this cold. Their metabolism is too high for their size. They need constant food intake to maintain body temperature.
But the humans can, Heideley said, watching as the human teams ventured out in shifts, gathering food and firewood while others maintained their shelters. Look at that coordination. They've assigned roles. Some tend the fires, some hunt, some gather. They're not just surviving. They're maintaining a functioning micro-society.
It's actually impressive, Lodaro admitted reluctantly. Most Deathworld species are solitary survivors. The humans turn everything into a group project.
On day 36, the inevitable happened. The Sadaranans, faced with starvation if they stayed or hypothermia if they left their shelters, activated their emergency beacons.
Unbelievable!
Jimmy's voice boomed across the broadcast. Against all odds, facing challenges that would break most species, humanity claims victory once again! The Deathworlders prove that sometimes brains and cooperation beat brawn and natural advantages. In the research station, Heideley collected his winnings while trying not to grin too widely. Lodaro and Imid handed over their credit chips and ration packs with expressions of mingled disappointment and awe.
3 for 3, Imid muttered. How do they keep doing it?
Versatility, Heideley said, pocketing his winnings. They're not the best at any one thing, but they're good enough at everything.
Next episode's already announced,
Lodaro said, pointing to the screen where Jimmy was wrapping up.
Beast taming competition? No way humans win that one.
You said that about the desert, Heideley reminded him.
And the swamp, Imid added. Face it, Lodaro, these humans are unpredictable.
Beast taming, though?
Lodaro's throat sac inflated with renewed confidence.
That requires empathy, patience, understanding of alien psychology. Humans are brutes who solve problems with force and occasional cooperation. They can't just engineer their way into an animal's trust.
Want to bet? Heideley asked, already calculating the odds.
Absolutely,
both his companions said in unison. As the broadcast ended and the three researchers reluctantly returned to their actual duties, Heideley found himself thinking about what they'd witnessed. Humanity's entry into the galactic community had brought many changes, but perhaps none as significant as this shift in perspective. For eons, the galaxy had viewed Deathworlders as mindless brutes, dangerous but predictable. Now, through the lens of human entertainment, they were seeing something different. Survival as an art form, adaptation as intelligence, and the unexpected truth that sometimes the most dangerous species were the ones that looked the weakest.
You know what's really crazy?
Imid said suddenly, looking up from his workstation.
Before this show, I'd never have imagined voluntarily watching Deathworlders for entertainment. My parents' generation viewed them as monsters to be avoided at all costs. Now, here we are, scheduling our work shifts around their TV appearances.
Cultural shifts happen fast when humans are involved,
Lodaro agreed, his throat sac pulsing thoughtfully.
They have a way of making the terrifying seem accessible, almost friendly even.
Hey,
Imid called from his workstation, already distracted again.
Anyone else notice we haven't checked the anomaly readings in 3 days?
The universe can wait,
Lodaro replied, already pulling up betting sites for the next episode.
I need to research animal psychology across different Deathworld species.
Heideley laughed, a melodious sound that filled the station. The warps and electromagnetic anomalies would still be there tomorrow. But moments like these, where three different species could unite in their fascination with human insanity, These were fleeting and precious. Besides, he had a feeling the humans were going to surprise everyone with the beast taming too. They always did.